So yeah, AI readiness, step 5, part 2. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Part 1 of this webinar was taking place on Tuesday. As in on part 1, we are still at the 5th step in our ethical framework, which is a guide into ethical readiness for AI. Until now, we held for each step of our framework one webinar aiming at school, universities, and teachers, and another webinar aiming more at educational businesses. But for step 5, which is about the AI techniques themselves and the challenges and opportunities around modeling, we felt it makes sense to hold 2 webinars, both aiming at both educational businesses and educators. So in part 1, we discussed artificial intelligence in education and the way we approach questions regarding how and where AI should be used. We also briefly explained key concepts so that we will all understand what it means to do AI, what is machine learning, and what it is composed of. Today in part 2, we will discuss some of the misconceptions around artificial intelligence and what is a well-designed AI, what questions we should ask AI developers in order to evaluate how good is the AI solution they are suggesting we'll deploy, or if we are designing it ourselves, how do we make sure we are doing it right? And fortunately for me, for us, we have here today Professor Sheizaf Rafaeli, the president of Shenkar College for Engineering, Design, and Art in Israel. And he's a well-known professor in the area of computer-mediated communication. And Sheizaf will join us in the second part of this webinar and will discuss with us his perspective on step 5. And just to remind anyone who is joining us for the first time who we are, when I say we, these are Ben Debule on the right, Anissa Moini, Rose Lakin, Mutluk Kurova, Ali Chaudhry, myself, Carmel Kent, and Ibrahim Bashir. All of us are coming from the background of AI and education, HCI, human-computer interaction, learning sciences, and data sciences. Our 7 steps framework, for those, again, joining us today, is called Ethical, which is the cross-cutting theme, making sure that all of these steps would be implemented ethically. So even if you do not intend to build tomorrow your business or any school plan around AI, using AI mindset or readiness to use data in your business is always a good strategy. When done right, of course, which is what we will discuss today mainly. So the first 4 steps already discussed in previous webinars are first, educate, enthuse, excite about building an AI mindset within your community, because it is so important that as many people as possible in the organization, in the university, would be on board, open to this change. Second, tailor and hone the particular challenges you choose to focus on. 3, identify and collect data. 4, collect new data relevant to your chosen focus. And 5, today, AI techniques to be applied to the relevant data that you brought together in the previous steps. As this is the second part of this webinar, and for the benefit of those who couldn't join us on Tuesday, so we discussed the AI human collaborative framework that would help us thinking about how to choose, evaluate, or design AI systems. We discussed where AI's unfair advantages lie in comparison to us humans' unfair advantages, and what kind of capabilities we will expect from an AI agent to fulfill, and what we would expect to live in our own trusting human hands or decision making. And we also talked about what is artificial intelligence. We refer to it as the algorithms or computers demonstrating human traits of thoughts and reasoning. We talked about general purpose AI and narrow AI, and we discussed briefly the different approaches to machine learning and the most commonly used techniques. And today, I would like to take us all one step further and talk about misconceptions and even sometimes deception around artificial intelligence that I think it is so crucial for us to understand in order to interact critically and effectively with AI systems, with AI developers, and with the media. And after we see some examples of what not to do, we will discuss how to do AI right. In from 3 to 8 years, we will have a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. That was a prediction made by Minsky, a famous AI researcher in the early 70s. And needless to say, it's already 2020 and we are still not close to general purpose AI. And we will not come any closer in the foreseeing future if I will allow myself to make a prediction. But predictions are very rarely worth having and has consistently failed, especially when relating to technology having the ability to replace a well-rounded, intelligent human being, which is exactly what I would strongly say about Elon Musk's prediction or belief about replacing teachers. So there are a lot of misconceptions, a lot of confusion about artificial intelligence, which is a result of all kinds of misconception actually resulting from the sometimes deliberate vagueness of the term artificial intelligence, or the science fiction robotic images that you've seen here, and are also all the associations that come with them that are used in the media. So not just that we are close to or even got to general artificial intelligence and that AI will steal our jobs, but many such exaggerations and generalizations which can be very, very harmful. We can safeguard ourselves and our students from those when we understand better what is AI and what it can do, or even more so, what it cannot do. So just a few examples. This one, so it was an Economist, The Economist article published around 6 months ago. They published an interview with OpenAI's sentence generation system. So, and the article misleadingly say that the system's answers were not edited, which in reality, each published answer was selected from 5 options. This led the public to think that general conversational AI was just much closer than it actually is. The day after, a leading AI expert tweeted that the interview was impressive and that the answers are more coherent than those of many humans, where in reality, the apparent coherence of this interview stemmed from huge corpus of human samples the system learned from, as well as the selective choice of Tom Stangage, which is a completely human journalist. Another OpenAI actually example, around the same time they have published a misleading blog about a robot based on neural networks that learned how to manipulate a Rubik's Cube. This blog led many to think that the system had learned the cognitive aspect of cube solving, which is what we humans think of when we're thinking about solving a Rubik's Cube, for example, which cubic faces to turn and when, where this wasn't true. They have failed to emphasize properly that the cube was equipped with Bluetooth sensors, and the fact that even in the best case, only 20% of fully scrambled cubes were solved. The Washington Post, which published at best an unclear article about that, has later issued a correction saying, correction, OpenAI focused their research on physical manipulation of a Rubik's Cube using a robotic hand, not on solving the puzzle. And we have more examples of neural networks solving a very simplistic versions of complex problems articulated in a very misleading way. So for example, the article in the upper side of this slide claiming that a neural net solves the three-body problem 100 million times faster. Failed to mention that the network didn't actually solve the problem, but resulted in approximation on a much easier and simple version, toy version of the classical problem. As in the previous example, there was a correction article issued later by the same, by the way, the same Gary Marcus from the previous example, but the usual, but as usual, the corrections get much less public attention and the damage is usually already done. So fortunately, and much less known, much less published by the media, we have experts warning us from the illusion and misconceptions about AI and other technological advancement from the 50s, where we can see as an example, Shannon's himself warned from overhyping out of misunderstanding of the information theory. And on the right, we can see a historical footage from 1973 of the Lighthill debate on artificial intelligence. Professor Sir James Lighthill, I think the one with his back to the camera here, who was asked by the parliament to evaluate the state of AI in AI research in the UK, and concluded by criticizing the utter failure of AI to achieve its grandiose objectives, and implying that many of AI's most successful algorithms solves in reality just simpler toy versions. Not much has changed from then in that aspect, at least. So Lighthill report was contested in a debate broadcasted by the BBC, as you can see, which was called "The General Purpose Robot is a Mirage." One of the special guests that you can see sitting there of the debate was McCarthy, John McCartney, one of the founders of AI, who attended the famous Dartmouth Summer Project camp in 1956, where the term artificial intelligence was first adopted. So even between the participants of the Dartmouth workshop, they didn't agree between themselves on the term artificial intelligence. And two very famous participants, Alan Newell and Herbert Simon, actually preferred the term complex information processing, which is, of course, not as sexy as artificial intelligence, but perhaps and maybe much more accurate and perhaps and maybe less harmful. So I have here the YouTube link if anyone wants to view that afterwards. So what do we need to look for in order to have our own sound evaluation if an AI system actually works well? So we need to first have an idea of how accurate our models are and relatively to what. In case of a system trying to predict the future reality, we can evaluate how well it did in retrospect. There is a wealth of accuracy metrics. Just some of them are here on the slide that would mean different dimensions of accuracy. And most of the time you will have to understand which is the metrics that best suits your application. So just as an example, if we are about to predict which students will drop out early from school, we need to decide which kind of error of the AI algorithm is worse for us, which kind of error we want to punish the system for. So there are two kinds of errors. So one of them to be wrong in predicting students as early leavers when they turn out not to be early leavers eventually. So this is what we will call false positives, because we predicted the students as positive in terms of early leaving modeling, but the prediction was false. So, or the other type of error would be missing on early leavers. So these would be called false negatives, because we predicted them as negative, non-early leavers, and they might turn to be early leavers essentially. So it's a wrong prediction. So once we understand which type of error is more important for us to minimize, and many times the type of error we want to minimize is chosen for ethical considerations, we would understand which metric we prefer to evaluate our model with, a metric which will punish more the more critical error for us. It is important to understand that reaching 100% of accuracy is impossible for technical reasons, but also because most of the times, as we spoke many times about in this webinar, we are making our best with the data we have available to us. And the data available is at best just an approximation of one part of the reality and never covers the reality as a whole. A related problem is that of overfitting. So it may sound impressive to have a model that is 99% accurate, but if it is not robust to changed conditions, you might be better off with one that is just 70% accurate, but simpler. Which brings me to an even more important issue. Many times, accuracy of our models is not the only or even the primary mean to evaluate our machine learning applications. What if our model is extremely accurate, but it doesn't make sure my students are safe? What if it is completely takes out some human consideration from the equation? What if it doesn't allow the human decision makers to account for or even understand the system's recommendation? What if it perpetuates an existing gender or race bias? Truth to be told, there are numerous ways in which machine learning models and AI in general can harm. And most of the time, we can make a great use of an AI-safe application, even in the price of somewhat lower accuracy. You want to be accurate, of course, but you also want to be fair. You want to promote the well-being of your students or staff. You want not to invade their privacy. You want to empower the decision-making abilities and not the other way around. So I'm not just talking about the high-profile stories of driverless car incidents. I'm talking also about biases in search, biases in classification, biases in justice, biases in education. And here you can have many, many such horror stories in education specifically. I'm talking about discrimination, denial of individual autonomy, and non-transparent actions, outcomes as we talked about the last time, and of course, invasions of privacy. What do we do? So AI ethics in its widest sense, which is completely based on human intelligence and common sense, always was and still is the best weapon to safeguard us and make sure we make good, not just well-intentioned, but also well-designed, well-implemented, well-deployed artificial intelligence. AI as an academic field dates back to the 50s with the Dartmouth meeting, but the ethical debate is almost as old. However, it is only in recent years that the advances in computational capabilities of machines and applications of AI systems have brought the opportunities and risk of AI into sharper focus of everyone. And here are just very few and high-profile initiatives and research that promotes AI ethics, specifically in education on the right, and tries to give us, consumer or developers of AI, real tools to deal with the risks. So this is just one of the most useful frameworks to my mind, AI for People. It's a project talking about how do we take very high-level principles of AI ethics and actually make them useful for us to work on a day-to-day basis. So what they said is, okay, we already have bioethics. It was here for a long time, very well deployed already, and we have it to guide us within a similar ethical guidelines in artificial intelligence. And so they have listed 4 main ethical principles taken from the field of bioethics. The first one is beneficence, which is about prioritizing human well-being as the outcome of our systems, and to ensure that AI technologies benefit and empower as many as people as possible. So having those wide coverage of people to be empowered is very crucial. The second is non-maleficence, which is about privacy, security, about all the kinds of negative consequences of overusing or misusing artificial intelligence technologies. The third one is about autonomy, and that's the power to decide, striking the balance between the decision-making power we retain for ourselves and that which we delegate to artificial intelligence. And the quote from AI for People is that must not impair the freedom of human beings to set their own standards and norms. The fourth one is justice. So we are talking about preserving solidarity, avoiding unfairness, relating to the use of artificial intelligence to correct past wrongs, such as eliminating unfair discrimination, promoting diversity, and preventing the rise of new threats to justice. So all sound very abstract, I know, and very high level, but there are already many interesting tools helping to implement those, each of the principles in the day-to-day routine of developing systems. But there is one very interesting new principle in addition to the traditional bioethic principle, not less important, that our AI applications would need to be evaluated by. And that is what they called explicability. And when they said explicability, they meant explainability. So the model's way to interrupt, okay, and explain to us what the kind of decision they're taking and how. And another aspect of that is accountability. So who is accountable to the decisions or the recommendations that AI system will make? So explainability actually describes the process of making something plain or understandable. In the context of machine learning, it provides us with understandable explanation of how a model behaves. And basically, it just helps us figure out what's behind a model prediction and how these models work. As fairness and unbiasedness have become such an important criteria for model optimizations, machine learning explainability is an essential tool for us humans decision makers to check these properties for a given machine learning system. So if it's not explainable, it would be very hard for us to evaluate whether the model is biased or whether it is fair. Take as an example a very complicated model that would be very hard to understand and follow the logic for a decision. If, for example, we will tailor a 99.99% accuracy of a model predicting that a student is about to fall behind due to the corona, for example. And let's take a fictitious example. We have a student called Jenny, which is predicted in 88% probability to fall behind if this model of learning, remote learning, continues. And let's say the model is completely opaque, it's not transparent when you cannot explain why. It really doesn't serve us well without suggesting why and how it has come to this conclusion. It really would not help Jenny or her teacher if they don't know which data points about Jenny and her learning mostly raise the concerns. Artificial intelligence and machine learning explicitly doesn't have to be black boxes. It can be explainable, and they should be. So a few examples here. One example to a very transparent and simple model in the lower side of this slide. It's a decision tree. So if we have a model that will suggest to us whether to walk or take a bus, and it will lay out the features that it concerns, the order of their importance. So you can see that first you evaluate the weather, and just then whether you're hungry or whether you have the time. And it would also lay out for us the criteria. It could be very useful for us. Or in the right upper side of the slide, you can see a model for predicting that someone might have the flu even before they can be tested for it. So for example, if a model predicts someone is about to have the flu, if it can rank for us the symptoms that led it to that decision, or which of the symptoms led us to this decision other than other alternative, it turns out from a black box mode of prediction to an explainable model, and makes it much more useful. Of course, as always, there are no free lunches. Machine learning capabilities of achieving high accuracy are many times traded off with explainability. This trade-off may consist of discarding more complex models such as neural networks for simpler algorithms like decision trees or many others that can be explained or can be tailored with some explaining packages that we now have. So as I said earlier, explainability or transparency and accuracy should be both used side by side to evaluate artificial intelligence system, and both should be taken into account. One last issue or topic before we will invite Sheizaf, which is for me personally one of the most fascinating aspects of open and explainable computational model, which Carmen also mentioned in her discussion with us on Tuesday, is how we can use data and analytical model to serve as our eyes and ears in the classroom, especially when the classroom is remote. So as an example of a research that we are carrying, where data is being collected and processed, providing analytics to teachers about online collaboration of their class, while leaving the final pedagogical decision-making to the teacher. It helps the teacher, in essence, to be in every place with every student and see what kinds of interactional pattern they take within the class discussion. And it also gives the teacher a view and some metrics of the group as a whole. So not just the individual collaborative skill, but actually what's going on my class. So one of machine's unfair advantages is in seamlessly collecting data from a number of modalities and presenting the teachers with insight that then she can use in assessment or in realizing very early what is going on in her class and whether she needs to put in place any kind of intervention. Or even the students themselves can use it in order to self-regulate their learning. So, for example, starting with individual assessment, how much they've contributed to the discussion, how much in response to other students, their influence in the classroom, who took the time to read inside and outside the conversation. But then we also want to have the big collective picture. Here, for example, you can see a high-level map of 4 main discussions that university students were asked to debate about. And you can see the interactions mapped here in the picture. So purple links would be argument for, so argument that people made for the statement in the debate. Greens are against. Brown is but, so some kind of a conflict. Blue is related to, so extending or elaborating others' content. Orange is their original tagging. So essentially you see that there was collectively an agreement about the first debate, mixed emotion about the second debate, and an objection about the last two. So it gives you a very quick and efficient view of what's going on in your class. Or another quick example, how can we spot creative patterns? So again, with the same discussion, you can see in green those links that students have done where they took two already discussed topics and then in retrospect related them, which is a lot of what creativity is about. So I think that would be a very good point to ask Sheizaf to join us, as this project that I just shown is one of the number of projects that we are both involved in. And it is related to the use of AI and data analytics for teaching and learning. So Sheizaf, aside from being a higher education instructor, a very experienced one, and heading one of the top engineering, design, and art colleges in Israel, is also a very seasoned researcher who had a lot to do in the area of AI and education. And I can say so much more about the wonderful initiative, Sheizaf, that you pushed and established in education specifically, and that I was lucky enough to be your PhD student. But instead, maybe I would let you talk. So first, thank you so much for coming. It is genuinely such an honor to have you here. And can you please tell us a bit about yourself and about Shenkar?
Sure. First, a delight to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you, Carmel. I was trying to run through my mind how many years we've been collaborating, and it's been a long time. But I guess I've been around for even longer. You can see it in the picture, white hair. And this topic of computers in various instances, and specifically in education, is something that is only growing in scope and importance all the time. And studying these systems, developing them, trying to identify the weaknesses and trying to work on the missing parts, and trying to spread the word about good things, is a task that I'm really delighted that you're harnessed to and continue to contribute to. Yes, I'm president of Shenkar as of earlier this year. I moved into the position just a couple of weeks before COVID broke out, so it was a really interesting time to move into this new position. And as people at Shenkar consistently remind me, I brought them all of this trouble, because from what used to be an entirely analog and in-person teaching situation in a college that is worldwide known for its work in tangible and physical things, such as art and fashion and textile and design, and the tangible aspects of engineering, we pretty much overnight, like the rest of higher education, were shifted into online teaching. And they blame me for it because I've been in online teaching, as you know, Carmel, for many, many years. I tried to trace back. I think the first online course I taught was in the early 1980s. So I guess I am the, what do they call it, the alpha patient in this, for some people in this
the museum of the history of technology.
Right, but the point is that this virus of online education that has now hit everyone is, at least by some people, I'm blamed for having started the spread. So yes, I've been doing this for many years, and now everyone is doing it, and switching to it was probably the strongest expression of thinking about the roles of computers and networks in teaching and learning. Up until not very long ago, say the beginning of last year, we were in a safe little corner, those of us dealing with online education. A single-digit percentage of education generally saw the light and moved into online education full force. People were testing the waters cautiously. There were critiques, and there were also the gurus and those who've converted and seen the light, but it was not mainstream. It is now the way in which things are done, whether you like it or not. And so questions like the ones you've just addressed are questions that now everyone needs to think about. It's no longer really an option. In my institution, I literally had to switch gears midway uphill in the middle of the semester and move 5,000 students overnight to online education, moving thousands of students online, hundreds of instructors in hundreds of classes, some of which are classes such as how do you design fashion, or how do you design a hospital arrangement solution. We have an architecture department. How do you teach architecture? How do you teach about texture? It's a little bit like the philosophical questions of how do you tell a blind person about the color red. We suddenly had to face all of these theoretical critiques of online teaching without time to prepare, without time to train instructors, without time to come up with an organized manner. And the main goal was to save that semester that just ended. We are now scrambling to plan next year with still that amount of uncertainty, with not knowing where we're going. I don't know how about at UCL, but here nobody knows. Are we going to be completely online? Will it be partly hybrid? Will it be by discipline? A large part of my college is workshops. We have a department that focuses on, it's actually one of the 3 leading departments in the world, in jewelry design. How do you teach jewelry design by correspondence? It's something that becomes very complicated. Enter computers and networks, not just as facilities to amplify and broadcast and transmit, but at a deeper level. How do you use computers and networks in a wise way to make teaching and learning worthwhile without having the benefit of a ramp-up time, without having the opportunity to plan this with a corpus of teachers who are very good and were selected and trained and experienced in the old sage on the stage or mentor at your side in the laboratory while teaching chemistry or teaching electronics or teaching fashion design or teaching design or whatever it is. Well, I'm reminded of the early 90s when the internet first arrived, when the network suddenly became not just a playground for a few computer scientists, but suddenly the doors were flung open and the masses were invited. There was a real question, what will this do to us? There's a classical book by Nicholas Negroponte called Being Digital, where he lays out what he thinks the implications, positive and negative, moral and immoral, psychological and sociological, might be. I think the book was originally published in 95 or 94, and it's a really good book to read because he then faced a conundrum that we are facing now. This massive technology suddenly lands on our shores, and we need to decide. We need to make regulatory decisions. We need to make parental decisions. We need to make educational decisions. We need to make leadership decisions, all based on a technology that many of us know too little about. And as you said, we'll have real problems in predicting because whose quote is it that predictions are really difficult, especially when they're about the future? Yeah, predictions are difficult, and with technology that evolves so quickly, it is hard. I would like to have the 2020 version of Being Digital, this time the version called Being AI? Will there be a new book that talks about artificial intelligence, not just having computers and moving from atoms to bits, which is something we've experienced for the last almost 3 decades, but going beyond that, going to a period where suddenly humans are not the only ones learning. This business of machine learning introduces the idea that learning is no longer just the special domain of carbon creatures. Learning is seriously something done by silicon creatures. And if machines learn, then can we learn something about learning from the fact that machines learn? I think you presented a really interesting position about whether we'd like more accuracy, whether there's ethics considerations. And I think I agree with everything you said, but I'd like to take it a step further. Among the definitions of AI that you presented, there are 2 definitions that I would like to add. One is that the introduction of artificial intelligence is the opportunity for us to once and for all lay to rest a debate, if one still exists, about evidence-based approaches. I'm old enough to remember that that was a question, not an answer, that whether evidence-based approach is something we should tip our hat to. And maybe I'm still arguing that while the rest of the world has moved forward, but bear with me. I think it's an important point to hammer in. Evidence-based is the best way to do things. There are lots of mistakes that one can do along the way when relying on evidence uncautiously or not professionally, but we really need to seek evidence before we make decisions. And that's what machine learning is about, that's what artificial intelligence is about, and that is what the fact that, good or bad, most of our teaching has now moved to computer-mediated situations, and so we have mountains of data. The big second thing that one should mention is that we have mountains of data accumulating, and we shouldn't allow these mountains to bury us. We shouldn't allow landslides to blind us, but we should also not be blinded to the fact that we now have data. And it is one of our most important roles. Make use of this data. We can make use of it in the form of machine learning. We can make use of it in the form of research. We can make use of it in the form of thinking about what these data reflect and what they represent. One thing we should not be able to afford is to disregard these data. We should pay respect to the fact that enormous amounts of access logs, content logs, writing, expressions, recordings are available, and we are beginning to develop the ability to extract meaning from these data. And for those data that we have not yet discovered how to extract data, we should learn how to extract data, how to make use of these data. I've been teaching in various forms since sometimes in the 1970s, and due to economic realities, the classes that I've been teaching have been growing. I was fortunate enough to be a young lecturer in the 1970s with manageable graduate school classes of 10 or a dozen students. Mm-hmm. That is a long lost memory. You walk into classes with 50 students, 100 students. The data that you presented, one of the last slides, was from classes with many hundreds of students. And I think this is a reality that everybody faces. And the result is that one of the most important tools in teaching, the eye contact, the ability to see when eyes glaze over, the ability to see when people are not there, is lost.
Right.
But we have the data, and the data allow us to. I would much rather go back to those golden days when there were small groups and interpersonal relations, and I knew each student by name and by background. But as a president who also needs to deal with a budget and report to my board of governors, I know that's not going to happen. The 5,000 students in the institution that I lead, will receive most of their education in classes so big that their instructors don't know them by name.
But it's also an opportunity, right? Because it's more inclusive. People have access to education now.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's one of the reasons for these growing classes. If we had different public policy, we might have been able to hire more instructors, but that's a conversation I don't want to get into. Given the fact that is what classes look like. By the way, not just in higher education. When I went to elementary school and in high school, I also, this is back when dinosaurs were still roaming the earth, I went to schools that had small classes. My children went to much larger classes. And once again, what I'm saying is that whether this is something that is reversible or not is a policy question. The fact is, though, and especially when much learning takes place online, that we now have these sensors. We know who is online. We're able to do some interaction that is machine-driven to make sure that people are awake. We are able to provide more senses approached by the content. And I think we have the mandate, maybe even the expectation and requirement to make use of these data. I think we need to look at several things. I think we need to look at interaction. Two of the last slides that you presented hinted at that. We want to encourage interaction. When the whole world moved to Zoom, just like we are now, we suddenly slid back. It was a massive sliding back to the sage on the stage. One person talking, everybody else muted and their cameras off. Let's fix that. Let's make use of breakout rooms. Let's make use of online chat. Let's make use of encouraging and inspiring discussion. Let's do more peer learning. Let's do all of this that is community-based and communication-based. And the technology is agnostic in this regard. It can do it. Right now, we should be made aware of the fact that our initial reactions were to go back to the lecture, to the sage on the stage. There is no mandate or requirement by technology to do so. And in fact, we can measure, we can ask how many of the students participated, contributed, wrote something down in the chat, did some peer-to-peer interactions. Here's a great opportunity. For the first time in my career as an educator, I can, with a clear conscience, encourage students to express themselves and talk during my lectures. In the physical lectures, it would have been a problem. They would interfere and disturb other people. They would take up valuable time. They would stop the stream of my thoughts or talk. Now with parallel systems, we can have back office, we can have back channel discussions, and we should do that. I've started to look at some data on recorded classes, small, medium, and large, and there's still too little of this. This might be something that we can do. Back to AI, once this takes place, we have a little window into the minds of people, even without sophisticated measurement, even without sophisticated assessment tools.
Right.
We can see we can see the degree to which students are processing, the degree to which they are involved, the degree to which they reinterpret content, the degree to which they make it their own. And this is all fodder for AI. I think it's time we do so. I think you made a very important and cogent points about explicability and the fact that if we use AI, we need to insist on AI explaining itself, being transparent. That's important for justice, for equality, for all of the ethical concerns. And I think you're absolutely right. I think I'll take issue with you, slight issue, about whether this needs to be by restricting AI to just rule-based systems. I think we learned in the 70s and early 80s that it's not that easy to deconstruct all our knowledge to rules. And this is experience I can bring from teaching art and design and the more humanistic aspects. If I required my painting instructors or my drawing instructors or the sculpting instructors or music creativity instructors to come up with the rules that guide their profession, I would either lose them or the students or both. There are simply large swaths of human knowledge that don't lend themselves to rules. And one of the promises of machine learning is that machine learning can extract algorithms or prescriptions even without knowing the rules, even without being able to explicate the rules. And I don't want to rule out those systems. I do want to insist on there being some auditing of what comes out. I do want to insist on humans
Absolutely.
being involved, but I would certainly accept, I would certainly accept a medical treatment generated by machine learning, even if the medical treatment isn't able to explain the choice of dosage or whatever. It just has this huge nonlinear regression that feeds into it. I'd like to preserve that.
Sheizaf, I think we have some questions from the audience, if that's okay, because I think people
Absolutely.
want to ask you some things. Roland, do you have some questions for
Yeah.
Sheizaf?
If we've got time, I wanted to ask one, but Mutlu's come up with something, just saying with regards to Sheizaf, your analogy about the arrival of the internet and the move to online education because of the pandemic. Do you estimate the impact being similar, so that we can't imagine a world now without the internet? So in the future, should we think of education without we shouldn't be thinking of education without an online aspect to it after the pandemic? And if that's the case, what are the 3 things you think we need to focus on now to make this transition smoother?
Let me answer the latter part of your question. The 3 things we need are caution, caution, and caution, because we're playing with fire. And just like previous revolution, when humankind discovered fire, we did wonderful things with it. We can no longer imagine life without it, but we better be careful because it also causes burns and fire and so forth. The earlier part of your question, can we imagine education without online components? I would take the pretty extreme view that says, no, we cannot. If you want to live offline, you're going to have to be a very special kind of hermit off in the desert. It's not just things related to the accessibility and the amount of knowledge and information and entertainment and attraction online. It goes to the very core of what we want to educate. If education is both values and knowledge, both reside online increasingly to a degree that is inseparable. Let me refer to knowledge first. We need memory in the way that we needed it when I was growing up. A very large part of being educated was knowing things by heart. And the story I always tell is that I still remember by heart the phone numbers of all of my romantic partners. I don't remember the phone numbers of my 3 sons. And that's not because I love my sons less. It's because nowadays there are things you don't need to commit to memory. And this whole idea of what it is that you learn by heart has been strongly affected by the explosion in the amount of knowledge there is to know and the growth of knowledge and so forth. But I do need to know how to find things. I do need to know how to locate my son's phone number. And I do need to know how, and that's online. That's where these things reside. On the values side of education, the much more important part of education, I think there's an even larger impact of online. Paradoxically and maybe surprisingly, we live in a world that is suddenly, within the span of half a generation, entirely an urban world. There are exceptions, but we, those of us talking to each other, live in an urban world. We live in a world that already has almost 4 times as many people alive as there were when I was 20. So when I was 20, there were only 2 billion people on the face of the earth. There are now 4 times that. So it's an urban and dense world, and therefore the networks and communities have changed to a degree that is unrecognizable. And because they've changed to a degree that is unrecognizable, the way they talk to each other, the way they conduct governance, the way they conduct commerce, the way they conduct family, the way they conduct other kinds of relationships, even friendship, is no longer what it used to be even 20 years ago. And as a result, education needs to change. If people find their spouses online, if people divorce online, if people maintain family contacts online, if people do their religious rituals online, then education can no longer be not online. It has to be online. And so your question is a great question. It might sound politically correct to say, no, you know, there still are homeschooling capabilities, or there still are these romantic rural ideas of education. I'm sorry, I don't believe in that anymore. With a dense, crowded urban world, online is now the main artery through which life happens, and that therefore it also already is the main artery through which education happens. And so what we need to do is be very cautious about how we adopt it. We shouldn't treat anything as the best arrangement. Just like the blackboard was not the best arrangement, and we shouldn't consecrate it. And just like the classroom wasn't the best arrangement, just like the book, the printed book, had its era and is now almost over. We shouldn't treat the Zoom as the be all and end all. But we need to improve it. We need to find all of its drawbacks. We need to think about the drawbacks in AI as well, and look at the regulatory and moral limits that are required, and where we need to spend our attention in improving it. But bottom line, to answer your question, online forever.
That's a great finale. Thank you so much. It's already 5. Roland, should we, I need to share the screen to just finalize it.
I've put up the links in the chat for
okay.
the next webinars if people want to come along.
Okay, fantastic. Sheizaf, thank you so much. It was fascinating. I would like to sit for a few more hours in here.
As you know, we will, the 2 of us.
It
was a delight. Thank you for inviting me. Wish you all luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And health.
And health.
Absolutely.
For coming along. As said, yeah, put the link in the previous in the chat for the next set of webinars, and we hope to see you to cover step 6 on the 28th and the 30th of July with Dr. Assistant Professor Mutlu Kukarova and Professor Ben.
Associate Professor.
Associate Professor. Yeah, what did I say?
You said Assistant Professor.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Bye. Thank you.